welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. A prominent Ethiopian opposition party, Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice, EZEMA, has called on the government to arm civilians so that they can defend themselves from attacks by rebels of the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, in Oromia region. In a post on Facebook, EZEMA says, "We would like to strongly emphasize that it is imperative to arm communities living in places that government security forces cannot easily reach in a legitimate and organized manner to enable them resolutely defend themselves." The Ethiopian party is one of the main opposition parties that agreed to work with the government, and its leader, Professor Birhanu Nega, is the Minister of Education. Its call follows attacks that have claimed the lives of hundreds of civilians, destroyed property, and displaced millions in western Oromia. Meanwhile, the spokesman of the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, in northern Ethiopia, Getachew Reda, in a Twitter post accused the federal authorities of fanning the conflict in Oromia. Meanwhile, a UN investigation has found that at least 131 civilians in the Democratic Republic of Congo died in a November attack by the M23 rebel group. The UN report said the massacre took place in two villages, Kinshishe and Bambo, and the Rutsuhuru district of the eastern North Kivu province. Investigators said the attack appeared to be a reprisal from a current government offensive on the rebels. M23 denied the massacre, blaming stray bullets for just 8 deaths. But the UN's MONUSCO peacekeeping mission in the country said 102 men, 17 women, 12 children were arbitrarily executed by the rebel group as part of reprisals against the civilian population. The report also said that at least 22 women and 5 girls were also raped. The statement says that the violence was carried out as part of a campaign of murders, kidnappings and looting against 2 villages in the Rutshuru territory as reprisals for the clashes between M23. The government had initially said that over 300 civilians were killed in the attack, which took place between the 29th to the 30th of November. But its spokesman, Patrick Muyaya, accepted on Monday that it was difficult to arrive at a firm figure as the region was under M23 occupation. We go to health now. A shipment of Ebola vaccine candidates set to be used in a clinical trial have arrived Uganda. The country has confirmed 142 cases with 56 deaths since it announced an outbreak of the sudden strain of Ebola in September. According to the Health Ministry spokesman, Emmanuel Anebiona, the consignment will be received from the World Health Organization representatives at a warehouse near the capital, Kampala, and the start date of trials is expected to be announced by the health minister. However, Uganda has not registered any new positive Ebola cases in over 3 weeks, indicating that the outbreak might be under control. And we talk now to Akiala Ishaku, who is a consultant public health physician. He joins us virtually. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
What do scientists, what do you know about this trial vaccine?
And so trial vaccines, a vaccine trial is a clinical trial that aims in establishing the efficacy, the safety of the vaccine prior to being licensed. When you look at vaccine clinical trials, it goes through stages, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, with what we refer to as preclinical trials, clinical trials, and other forms of trials before it is being used in a human population. And so in cases of emergency, just like the way we saw during COVID, WHO has the mandate to approve clinical vaccines that are undergoing clinical trials for outbreak. So just like the way we saw during COVID. Now, in the case of Uganda, 3 vaccines candidates have been marked as for clinical trials that have passed through the preclinical stage. The phase 1 and phase 2. It has also been tried in small human population, so it is required to be tried in a larger population to ascertain the safety and efficacy. But because of the emergency in Uganda, it was being approved by the WHO for trial for among large population, and so that's why it is being used in Uganda. So vaccine trial is just a clinical trial of vaccine that it is being done to establish the efficacy and the safety of the vaccine prior to license.
So, Dr. Ishako, there are risks to this trial that is taking place, but tell us also the difference about this Sudan strain of the Ebola.
And so one of the major differences between the Sudan strain and the Zaire strain emanated from the geopolitical region where the strains are being found. Like the Sudan strain was just being discovered in Sudan, while the Zaire strain is being discovered in DRC. But what is quite key in their differences too is in their genetic makeup. But beyond the genetic makeup, it is in their presentations of signs and clinical signs and symptoms. For Sudan viruses, it is not as deadly as the Zaire viruses. The mortality rate ranges from 40% to 100%. But for Zaire, it's about 60% to 100%. So you can see that the differences in mortality rate differs. Secondly, one of the major differences too lies in the transmissibility. The Zaire Ebola virus has high transmissibility index, meaning that the transmission can occur very high within a population over a short period of time. Whereas that of Sudan, it takes a longer period of time before it gets transmitted, so it is not as deadly as the Zaire. One of the major differences, too, again, to be established between the two strains is that the Sudan strain has associated clinical signs and symptoms that has to do with pulmonary disorder, issues of chest pain, and the rest, whereas in Zaire, you tend to not to have such kind of clinical signs and symptoms. In the Zaire, it is basically domiciled in the liver, in the lungs, the virus, and also associated organs. But basically, the Sudan, it is also only limited to the liver. So you look at, in terms of the habitation of the virus, in terms of the geographical location of the virus, in terms of the genetic makeup of the virus, and also in terms of their reaction to vaccine. So basically, these are the basic differences between the Zaire virus and the Sudan virus.
And, you know, from all that you said, we're also seeing some similarities with the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2, that is. But then looking at this, are we likely to see different vaccines for Ebola according to the strain, just like as we've had with COVID-19 and the boosters?
No, the good thing about the Ebola vaccine is that the vaccine can take care of virtually all the strains that we have discovered. In fact, it's designed in such a way that it can also take care of the future strains that we are anticipating. Like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it is being administered in 2 doses within 56 days. The first doses takes care of the Zaire strain, while the second dose takes care of the Sudan strain. In fact, so it makes it much more easier because of the nature of the biotechnological advancement in terms of the designs of the vaccine. So I think it is good news that we have a candidate vaccine that can be able to take care of polyvalent strains of the Ebola virus.
We understand that in the past 3 weeks, Uganda has not recorded any new positive Ebola cases. What's your take on, you know, the nature of this Ebola virus and what we're seeing in Uganda? Do you think that it is gone, or do you think that it will mutate? What do you think is happening?
I think it has clearly shown is that the active surveillance has really taken place in Uganda. There is a halt too in terms of community transmission, so there is no community transmission. But that does not make us not to also adhere to the non-pharmaceutical safety measures. It calls on the African continent to actually look inward to see lessons also that we need to also learn from this sharp decline in number of cases of Ebola virus. So it's a good news.
Oh dear. I think we've lost him, consultant public health physician. We've been speaking to Dr. Kiala Ishaku. Doctor, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah, so I think it is a very good step in the right direction that we want to commend the African CDC and the WHO for actively involved in the surveillance and curtailing the outbreak of this Ebola virus in Uganda. It shows that there is no community transmission, but it also calls on the member states to also adhere strict protocol in terms of even travel advisory to Uganda and other places that there are outbreaks of this virus. So I think it is a good news, but it is also good for us to go into a mass clinical trial of this Ebola vaccine to actually check for the efficacy and also for the safety.
We always appreciate your time on the program, consultant public health physician, Dr. Kiala Ishaku. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
We're staying with health. The World Health Organization has released a malaria report today and warned of new challenges, including mosquito resistance to insecticides and parasite resistance to drugs used to treat malaria. The World Health Organization says that malaria cases and deaths remained stable last year after a worrying rise during the first year of the COVID pandemic. 95% of all malaria cases are in Africa, with children under 5 most at risk. Despite ongoing disruption to health services caused by COVID-19, malaria deaths fell last year by 6,000 to 619,000. New cases rose slightly to 247 million, a much slower rate than the previous year. The WHO says the relatively good results are due to countries strengthening their response to malaria prevention, testing and treatment. But the increasing resistance to insecticide used in bed nets is a worrying development, as well as mosquitoes changing their habits, biting during the day outside where they can avoid bed nets. So although the WHO has praised for countries working hard to tackle malaria, there is no room for complacency without renewed global effort. It says malaria could race ahead of the campaign to control it. And the IMF says that 2023 will feel like a recession. Trillions of dollars were spent during the pandemic on keeping businesses and households afloat. But as lockdowns ended, the global economy boomed. Factories couldn't keep pace. Lingering restrictions created labor shortages. Energy prices spiked. Russia invaded Ukraine, sending fuel costs even higher. The International Monetary Fund is warning that the worst is yet to come, and for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession. The World Food Programme also estimates an extra 70 million people worldwide have been driven closer to starvation since the start of the Ukraine war, in what it calls a tsunami of hunger. To see how this affects the Africa region, joining us is an economist, Dr. Tope Fasua. He joins me now from the UK. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much, Millicent, for inviting me.
Break this down for us as to how Africa will be impacted by this sort of doom message.
Well, it depends on how African leaders take it and their sincerity, because again, in every dark cloud, oftentimes there's a chink of of sunlight, and so how are they driving towards exploiting that chink? So, well, the IMF has said what it wants to say, and which is true. The fact that the COVID came, countries had to spend and break the bank, including countries in Africa, and of course the phenomenon of what happened during COVID has not been fully analyzed. And for some reason, because those who should analyze it are trying to run away from it, because the truth was that was the first time ever in the history of humanity that the world would be locked down. It never happened before. In 1920, during the Spanish flu, it wasn't, nobody commanded everybody in the world to stay indoors, so there were areas that weren't affected in many areas, but this time around we shut down everything. And of course, we now live in a globalized world, so the effect is going to keep reverberating, and that's what the IMF is saying, valid. But again, the point then, of course, later on the Ukraine war started with Russia affecting fuel prices, but it then depends on how African countries take this. We don't have to move in tandem, in lockstep with the rest of the world, especially Europe and America. Our economy is a lot distinct from theirs, of course, given the fact that some of us cannot refine our fuel, but many countries in Africa have their crude oil. Many countries have discovered crude oil which they can use on their own, and maybe it's time for them to go back to coal and whatever it is, whatever it takes to power the economy. Again, the agenda of climate change is there, but the point is also that we saw how countries like Germany and others went back to coal, went back to dirty oil, went back to whatever, when they needed to. So I think it's also an opportunity for Africa to think for itself and for us to also go back to providing and producing what it is we need, especially starting with food, because we're talking about starvation here. The truth is that, yes, quite a number of African countries depended on that region, Ukraine and Russia, for wheat, for example. But Africa is also where you have the most land that's uncultivated. Nigeria hasn't cultivated to 35% of this arable land. What's happening with the remaining 65%? So barring things like insecurity, terrorism, and all of that, taking our lands from us, we should make a move and take over our lands back again and do what we have to do, produce what we eat. If we can produce what we eat first and foremost, okay, then the rest is, can be strategically looked at and taken care of. Perhaps this is an opportunity for African countries to be a little bit more self-sufficient rather than, continue with the idea of total dependency on the rest of the world. So there's two ways to look at it.
Indeed, and you have said that, it's a global village, so whatever is happening in different parts of the world also affecting us here on the continent. But we've had series of monetary policies, fiscal policies, and this is drilling it down to Nigeria. And many wonder the impact because inflation is still on the rise. And then we know what the NBS talked about, the poverty index in the country with women and children mostly affected. Where do you see us headed, especially as we, head for a new year, 2023?
I'm trying to hope that the worst is over for Nigeria. Because we look at the thrust of the monetary policies that we've had of late, including the recent one about the cash in circulation and how much cash people can withdraw and all of that, trying to kind of demonetize the economy and make people move more into electronic banking, rather than all of this slush funds. The idea behind that is partly that, when there's so much cash moving around the country, then that's incentive for inflation, because inflation is when more cash is chasing after the few goods that are in circulation. So let's focus on productivity. So some of the monetary policy will help in that regard. Also, when there's so much money in circulation, there's a tendency for such monies to head outside for the dollar. So people want to buy dollar and keep under their bed because they believe that the naira is going to blazes, but the central bank is making the move to say, listen, that's not necessarily the case. So if less people have the incentive, then we're going to focus on the naira and see what we can do with our naira. The naira is our sovereign currency. We should be able to leverage on the naira within the Nigerian economy and de-externalize our economy. There's so much focus on dollar. Everybody's quoting dollar rate. Even someone selling something in some village in Nigeria is talking about dollar. Whether or not what he's selling is linked to the dollar. Of course, you can link things if you do the analysis long enough. But again, we need to focus on our country and our continent. I believe that some of the monetary policy issues and ideas we've floated lately is meant to curb some of is actually targeted at curbing inflation. Of course, there'll be other things that will curb inflation. Some of our inflation is also imported inflation. So, of course, as you may well know, the Central Bank has also put out quite a few policies that, will help in import substitution and, of course, reduce the reliance on importation. Therefore, you can cut off that imported inflation and then look at, the one that's the supply side in terms of, cost of production that may increase. And, of course, you look at the inflation that comes as a result of a devaluation. So one of the things I would recommend to them is do not devalue for now. Watch it, because if you devalue also, some of the other reforms they're trying to do, for example, deregulation of the oil sector, it kills that idea. The moment you devalue, whatever it is you have tried to deregulate goes back to zero and you have to start again.
I guess we will continue to watch the developments. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Tokwe Fasua, for joining me on the program. Well, let's head over to South Sudan, the world's newest nation. Women and girls have been disproportionately impacted by years of civil war and conflict. A stand-down day is being celebrated to fight against sexual exploitation and abuse. Women in the country are meeting other women, sensitizing them on the need for collective action to uphold the rights of women through its conduct and discipline team. They convened and connected with women's representatives in Gure, Juba, to organize a stand-down day, zero tolerance for sexual exploitation and abuse.
Sexual exploitation and abuse is another form of gender-based violence. So the Conduct and Discipline team has organized a stand-down day where we can come and celebrate this with the women. We talk about sexual exploitation and abuse. We tell them what the strategies of the UN are. But most importantly, they are our partners in the field. They are the ones who communicate with the community. They are the ones who are in the community. So we need their assistance for us to be able to carry out our mandate to fight against sexual exploitation and abuse. The theme today is Unite Against Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. The women of South Sudan here today have promised to accompany us throughout the whole of South Sudan as we meet with other women groups, as we educate them, and as we ensure that it doesn't happen in this country. Our goal is zero violence for women. Our goal is zero SEA in South Sudan.
And over in Egypt, a man who has been manufacturing and repairing soccer balls is not giving up his craft and sport loved by millions of Egyptians. He learned this craft from his father and has been doing it for over 50 years. Take a look.
In a familiar scene to the area, Mustafa Mahmoud Mustafa is skillfully stitching and inflating balls in his small shop in Old Cairo. The 68-year-old says he has been doing this job for more than 50 years, taking after his father.
My father used to work with soccer balls, making them from scratch, and I used to work with him and learn from him. We stayed like this until the 90s, when imports from China increased and balls with good finishing were sold at cheap prices, so I had to work in the fixing field. Clubs used to ask me to fix balls and I used to say no, but then I started working in repairs and I love the craft, so I repair balls perfectly.
But when cheap imports from China became prevalent within the country, Mustafa decided to shift his career from manufacturing balls to repairing them. He has worked in collaboration with several clubs, including popular Egyptian Lakhali and Zamalek clubs. But recently, he decided to just do the job in his shop due to his health. He serves customers who visit him frequently, asking him to restore their soccer balls.
People come to me and like my service, thank God.
Soccer is a loved sport by millions of Egyptians who now line up to follow the World Cup.
Well, too bad Egypt isn't lost in Qatar, with Senegal ending their dreams. But that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.